tools for distance and blended learning on EdSite. So on EdSite, we often say that we call ourselves an assessments for learning platform. And so we wanted to talk today specifically about tools built to support assessments for learning during this changing and unpredictable time. So let's go on to our objective for today. So we want to make sure that attendees know what's possible, to make sure that they're able to successfully assess students and respond to data during distance and blended learning. So we'll first talk about assessments in this context. Then we'll dive into designing content, sending it to students, and responding to data, followed with some short Q&A and announcements for upcoming webinars. So let's talk about assessments for learning. So on EdSite, we often bucket the process, this cycle, into 3 sections. You've got your content design, deciding what question types to use, what instructional materials to send to students. You've got the actual sending to students and then taking the assessment. And then you've got the analysis of the data and your response. And so we're constantly looking to support teams in this cycle. The response leads to new content, new student checks for understanding, analyzing where they're at with that standard. But what does this cycle look like when students aren't in our classrooms, or half of the students are in our classroom and half of the students are at home, and things are constantly changing? We need to make sure that you have a system that allows you to continue to support kids and provide them the material and intervention that they need. We want to make sure when we're going from, in the classroom to on the computer, that you're able to maintain teacher engagement and support and do so without it taking over your life. So we want it to be, not too time consuming and complicated for the teachers, but still highly effective in terms of having an impact on kids. So let's kind of dive into each piece of that three-part cycle we're looking at. So first, designing content. Many of you are familiar with EdSite. EdSite has a lot of question types. And so when talking about designing content, choosing the best question type that fits the skill is going to be essential. So we want to make sure when going from in-person exclusively to online assessments, whether they are in the classroom or they are a hybrid of in the classroom and at home or strictly at home, we want to make sure that you're getting an accurate idea of whether this student understands this fraction standard, whether this student understood how to use a Venn diagram. So instead of having students choose from pictures in a multiple choice or having students write everything, EdSite offers you question types that will actually assess the skill that you're teaching without simplifying it. So we want to make sure that during online assessments, wherever they are, your question types align and that your students have whatever supporting materials they need. So let's quickly go through that in more depth. So question types. As I mentioned, EdSite's got 60 types of question types, and this is just a quick run through of some of the range. If I'm an elementary teacher, I want to be able to actually have students manipulating clocks. If I'm teaching ELA and I want students highlighting parts of the text, making sure I've got that question type available. If I'm a math teacher, making sure I've got the math keypads with sine, cosine, tan, making sure I've got what I need to actually assess the skill we're going over. If I want them graphing, again, I'm letting them actually plot points and manipulate that graph. So EdSite has more than 60 types of questions, and those are going to be found in your EdSite, your top navigation bar. You've got all of your different menus. To find all of the question types, you can go to Questions, Create Question, and you're going to find different categories of question types. So do I want to have students labeling images, drawing images? So you've got this range of question types that I definitely recommend exploring this summer and as we're looking at next school year. A lot of times teams are so used to using purely the question types that mirror their state test. And those question types are great. It's great to use your table checkbox. It's great to use that specific drag and drop item. But there are more question types that you can explore that are going to help complement this time. A few question types specifically that teams have been using more during distance learning. The first is our upload question type. So it's actually within the essay response, but you can have students attach an image, attach an audio file, attach a video, PowerPoint, PDF. So if I want to have them do a project at home and then attach that as a question, and I as a teacher want to grade that on a rubric, you can do all of that within EdSite. For teams that are using EdSite schools, you've also got the option to have students record with a microphone, them speaking through answers. So if, you know, one of the challenges with distance learning is not being able to talk to our kids and have them explain to us how they got that answer. The microphone question type is a nice way to let students talk you through their process. Or if I'm a language teacher, actually speak to me my final exam question. So these are just some of the question types that you can look at using to make sure you're not oversimplifying your checks for understanding during distance and blended learning. Now, when thinking about instructional materials, if I want to, I can add a video at the beginning of my assignment, whether it's from YouTube, so it's Khan Academy, walking them through some graphing inequalities intro, or it's a video that I've pre-recorded of me teaching this lesson. I can actually embed that video into the question for students to watch and then answer. If I want to insert a passage, I want them to read something first and then answer the question, I can insert that again in that stimulus area. Now, if I want that video or that feedback or that explanation, not before they answer, but I want to add it afterwards for them to, you know, see why the answer is what it is, I can add videos into the solution. So every question editor has an option to add a solution, which becomes available to students once they submit and get feedback. So if I'm a student and I press submit, I'm looking at my student report and immediate feedback. I'm seeing, you know, a visual of what I graphed, what the correct answer was. You know, I'm seeing the actual numbers here. But up here, I've got a solution where maybe my teacher explained that, you know, this is supposed to point up because this part of the equation. You know, it could be a walkthrough. If I'm an ELA teacher, maybe it's walking through, if you selected B, we're confusing theme and setting. So you can have information typed or video or audio added up here in the solution for students to get that instructional material or that feedback. This is another example of, you know, if you're a science teacher and you miss your labs in class, because I'm sure you do miss your labs in class. PhET is a great educational resource based out of University of Colorado, and PhET Sims can be embedded into your EdSite assignment. So whether I'm embedding videos, PhET Sims, passages, EdSite assessments can really host your materials, but still measure student understanding afterwards. The last thing we'll say about designing content is the settings for the instructional tools your students are going to need. So assignment settings are going to be available to you every time you customize an assessment, every time you build something from scratch. And so this is a screenshot of my assignment editor. And I can click on the settings gear in the top right corner. I can open all settings, and I can see these student tools that I can make available to my students during their assessment. So if I want students to have a calculator available, if I want students to have a periodic table, if they need to have a reference sheet during this assessment. Text to speech is something that is built in for EdSite Schools teams. So that's part of our premium platform. And so teams can turn text to speech on or off. A lot of times before schools were shutting down, teams were using text to speech to support students that needed that on their IEP. I will say that during distance learning, a lot of teams increased the number of students getting text to speech, because if I'm not there to provide that teacher support, I want to make sure my kids are able to access the materials. So these are, just a quick overview of some of the things you can really be looking at when designing content on EdSite to make sure that the materials are adequately assessing the skills and providing the supports that students need to show you their understanding. So the next category is sending to students. And we want to make sure that the delivery and the settings are aligned with the purpose of your assessment, and that it's not, it's not too complicated. It's fitting in with your existing structures, your existing platforms. So let's dive into this. Now, we just looked at the assignment settings, so we're here again. Assignment settings don't just allow you to add a calculator and a periodic table and text to speech. It lets you turn on a ton of really cool features. So let's dive into some of the assignment settings that would be very relevant in how students take the assessment. So when I click on that open all settings, again, it's going to bring me to this pop-up where I can see on the left here, we already looked at student tools, but I've got basic settings, student report, control retakes, student view, access time windows, and access control. It sounds like there are a lot of settings. To be honest, there are a lot of settings, but the reason that there are a lot of settings is to give every team the capabilities to deliver their assessments in a way that fits the purpose. So we don't need to go through every single setting. We're going to focus in on the ones that are most relevant to formative and summative assessment during distance and blended learning. So even within this list, let's break this down further. So this is something we'll share out. Again, at the recording, you can always come back to this section to see the full list. This is just an idea of some of the most important features within the category of those settings. So of the ones in here that are the easiest just to talk through, the top one is randomized question order. If you are concerned about cheating at home and you want to make sure, you want to give them randomized questions. So if student A is texting student B asking for the answer to 1, well, everyone's got a different question 1. So you've got that randomized question order that you can turn on for those summative assessments. Math teachers, you also have some randomized question types, which follow up with us afterwards if you want to learn about how to use those. So that's your randomized question order. Hide answer details in report, do not display scores or any results. Those two settings I consider very similar. So really, those are, what do you want students to see when they submit their assessment? By default on EdSite, we make everything the most formative it could be. So when students submit that assignment, they are going to get immediate feedback. They're going to see what they got correct. They're going to see what the correct answer should have been on anything they got incorrect. If, again, this is a more summative assessment, I can choose to hide those answer details so they submit it. They don't know what the correct answers are. They just turn that in. I can also choose to not display scores or any results. Real quick, the difference here, do not display scores or any results shows them nothing when they submit it. It just submitting, have a good day, or whatever you decide to make your custom note. Hide answer details just shows them what they answered and whether they got them right or wrong. It doesn't tell them what the correct answers are. So those are, controls over your student report. But again, those are defaulting to the more formative setup. So if you want students getting feedback at home and this is a formative assessment, feel free to just leave those alone. The next one is about retakes. Again, this is EdSite defaulting to a more formative setup where students are able to do a retake. On your reports by default, it's always going to show you the first take. So don't worry, students can't change their score, but you as a teacher in the reports can choose to pull a best take or a best question by question take. So if, let's say though, you want that turned off, you can do that. You can turn off and disallow those retakes. And then these last two at the bottom really are about accessing the assessment. So whether you are in, let's say that you've got half of your students in school and half of your students at home, or a couple students at home, and you want to make sure that they are all taking this assessment from 9:05 a.m. to 9:55 a.m. You can actually set the time frame that they can open that assessment up. So I can say they cannot open it up at 10:02. They cannot open it up at 9:01. It's only within this window. So those are some nice controls to make sure students are accessing the assessment when they should and not beyond that. Now, some of these other features I want to spend more time talking about. So requiring a secure browser and tracking student focus, these on EdSite are really about security. So requiring a secure browser literally requires students to use the lockdown browser. They cannot open another tab. They cannot open the calculator, the other apps, different pages. That's part of the EdSite Schools platform. But if you are using the free platform, you can use the Track Student Focus option. So what the Tracking Student Focus option does is it will alert students at the beginning of the assignment that the teacher will be notified each time they move away from that assignment tab. So if I'm toggling over to a new tab to Google my answers, it's making a note of that. So at the end, teachers can go in and actually pull the student focused tracking details to see that the student left question 1 for 43 seconds. I mean, you probably don't want to micromanage the children this much, but you've got it here if you wanted to. So it's nice to have this level of detail if you can't have that lockdown browser. Another thing teams have asked us, is there a way that I can in the moment see not just the report? And that's going to be in our next feature we talk about, the real-time connect. Also, this is a good thing to note. Sometimes there are false alarms if you use like a YouTube video and then they click on the video. It might look like they're going to YouTube. So just be aware that there could be some things that you're embedding in there that make it look like they're going somewhere else and leaving EdSite. So those are our security, our secure browser, student focus features. let's talk about this Enable Real-Time Connect, which is what I am most excited about today. So the Real-Time Connect, when you turn it on in your assignment settings, from your home page, you're going to have an icon that says Connect. I can click on that and I can see all of my students live during the assignment. So this would be me as the teacher in the bottom right corner, and these are all of my kids. And I can actually see outlined in green or outlined in red whether students are on the assignment now. So if students are navigating to a different tab, this is your live view. This is my real-time indicator that a student has navigated away from EdSite. So I, as a teacher, can send a message to a specific student or to all of my students. So I've got this view of everybody, but my students, they only see me as the teacher. So the teacher sees all of the students see the teacher, but the students do not see each other. So if, I've got my student here, Rocky might have a question for me, so he can flag me as a teacher. He can send me a direct message, and then I can choose to have a direct discussion just with Rocky. So underneath each of my students that are actively working on this assignment, there is a call button. Don't worry, we're plugging in. Everyone who saw that low battery symbol. So underneath each student, there is a call icon. And when I click on that, it's going to mute me for all of the other students, and I can have a direct dialogue with that specific student. So it mutes me and pauses me for the rest. We have that direct intervention. So if I want to say to Rocky, okay, walk me through how you're simplifying your fractions. So it's something that I can use where the student is flagging me and I'm being responsive, or I'm using some of the real-time dashboards and live reports to see that, okay, Rocky is really struggling. He's missed questions 1, 2, 3, and now he's missing question 4. I want to have an intervention right now. So the idea here is that with your real-time connect setup, this can be formative or summative. If I'm looking to do intervention with a group of students, that's something with the EdSite Schools platform that you can do. So with the free EdSite platform, everybody has real-time connect. So that is part of that free platform. And so you can have direct conversations with your entire class or an individual student. With EdSite Schools, you're able to do small groups of students, and you're also able to have co-teachers, intervention specialists, administrators, other people also push into the assignment. So that's the real-time connect feature. We're gonna go through these next ones pretty quickly to make sure we can get through everything in time. Allowing answer checks after each question. What I like about this feature is if I'm giving students independent practice with 10 questions, I might be using Real-Time Connect so I can see how they're doing and I can provide intervention. But it's also nice to let students check after question 1, check my answer. Oh, it's supposed to be pointing down. Okay, so I can then implement that feedback when I answer question 2. So if you want to make this even more formative, I definitely recommend turning on allow answer checks after each question to give students that option to implement some of that automatic feedback from question to question. The last one we'll talk about in here is about time, which is ironic because we are running low on it. So time limits and showing elapsed time. On EdSite, you can set a time limit. So this allows you to say, I want, students to only have 90 minutes when taking this assessment. This is especially helpful during a hybrid or distance learning setup where students can, let's say I have 4 students at home and 20 students in school, and we set the time access window. Everyone's starting at 9 o'clock, but I want to make sure that everyone's assessment is submitted at 10:30. And I don't have a chance to do that at home to say, okay, pencils down, or I need everyone to submit and line up. So the time limit is actually going to automatically force the submission of the assessment at the end of that time. It's going to put a timer in the top right corner for students so they can see their time coming down. They'll get a warning at 50% and 80% of time of how much. We've gotten feedback that sometimes that stresses kids out. So you can choose to, instead of just using the time limit, you can use time limit and show elapsed time. And what show elapsed time will do is instead it counts up and it doesn't give them any warnings. So they can see how much time they've spent. It's not going to necessarily stress them out as much. It will still automatically submit at the end of the time limit though. So that's something to be aware of. So those are really our assignment settings. When we're talking about sending to students, we also want to make sure that this fits well when using with other platforms. So this is just a quick highlight of how you can push your assignments into Google Classroom. You can also push directly to Canvas. You can, if I need to grab a start code, I can just put my start code into my Schoology, into my emails if I'm emailing students. However you're communicating with students, EdSite is able to integrate really well into that communication flow. There's also a lot of single sign-on options, whether we are using Google email, whether we're using Canvas, Clever, Microsoft Office 365, and next year you can use ClassLink. So we want to work with what you've got, and we want to make it simple. And the final thing we'll talk about is just responding to data. So after I've designed, sent to students, I want to be able to use that real-time reporting, those summary reports, and some of that deep analysis to then drive my intervention. So really quickly, this is the live progress. So you can see in real time whether students are getting questions right or wrong. Again, it works really well with that real-time connect feature. So if I notice the whole class is nothing but red circles, I can whole group reteach. Pause, let's look at this. Here's what we know about fractions. After students submit, well, and actually, after students submit, if I need to do any grading, I have that choice to grade by student and grade by question, so I can still provide that feedback based on what they're doing, whether I'm looking at a rubric and I'm providing feedback on a rubric, or I'm annotating or adding comments into their free responses, or drawing, or record audio questions. This summary report, that's where you're going to be able to see your question by question, your standards analysis, and dive into the data a bit more. And for teams using EdSite Schools, you're also able to pull item analysis and performance band and growth. So there's a lot you can do. So we want to make sure that that full cycle is happening, from designing your content, students completing it, and then me analyzing the data and doing something with it. Just to, we've gone through this very quickly, but we're trying to make the most of your time. So if you'd like to dive into some of these topics a bit more, we have a content webinar with one of our partners happening next Monday. That one will actually be an hour long. So it'll be diving into a more detail around content, and they are actually content providers and experts that have interim assessments, diagnostics, really high quality content that's ready to be added to your EdSite account if that's something your team wants to pursue. We've also got an assessment security webinar on Wednesday, and that one will be an hour, so it'll be a bit slower pace. and dive more into assessment security. Just to wrap this up, you could be using these tools for an introduction to new material, that instructional piece, and your guided practice. You could be using this for your independent practice or just any kind of formative assessment. And you also could be using this for summative assessments, unit tests, benchmarks. So I'm going to switch it over to Brian. I know we are literally 1 minute over. I really appreciate all of you joining us. And if you have any questions, please contact support. If you would like to learn more about our EdSite Schools platform, feel free to reach out to schools@edsite.com. And Brian, do you have anything that you want to, have everyone talk about before we wrap up?
I think thank you to everyone who added questions in the chat. Sorry, I forgot to rewrite the first one out there, so I was giving an answer with no context, which is never a good thing. But one thing just to kind of highlight here that was written in here towards the end by Cassandra. This is something that could be used for remedial courses and during small group instruction. So that's definitely one application of this that we've heard from people. We've also heard from special ed teachers that this is a feature they're really excited about, or just teachers that want to work together and support their students. The other thing I would say is if you're interested in giving us more feedback on the Real-Time Connect, other features, you can contact us at schools@edsite.com. We just launched this Real-Time Connect feature, and we're really excited to keep enhancing it going into next school year.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, keep up the great work.